Hi everybody, this is Jimmy DeYoung. Welcome to Prophecy Today video. Today we're going to discuss geopolitical activities happening in our world. I want you to consider going to our website, prophecytoday.com, to listen to the interviews that I did with our broadcast partners this last weekend on Prophecy Today weekend. There at PTRN, you can hear everything they had to say. It was very informative. It gave us insight into current events that are actually setting the stage for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled. But on this telecast, we're going to be talking about the discussions that we had with our broadcast partners discussing geopolitical activities. For example, in Washington, D.C., Bob McGinnis talked to us about Libya being led by extremists, Turkish warships moving into the Mediterranean, Iran's smart bombs, and Iraq's unrest in light of the fact of the U.S. troop pullout in the very next couple of days. We talked with Rob Congdon. Dr. Congdon heads up our activities as we look at the European Union, and we talked about the European Union and Palestinian UN bid and how they're divided to some extent, the body politic in favor of the Palestinians having a Palestinian state and declaring that at the United Nations. We also talked about Poland, who says there will be a war in Europe over the Eurozone within the next 10 years. David Dolan gave us our Middle East news update. Palestinian preparation for the United Nations bid by the Palestinians is very, very concerning to the Israeli leadership. And, in fact, the Israeli leadership has the preparations being made for the demonstrations to take place starting next week and on into the time as they will go to the United Nations and make this declaration. Ken Timmerman talked to us and revealed some very important information that you need to know, the Iranian involvement in 9/11, and then we talked about the pact that has been made between Iran and Turkey and focused on the Kurds there in northern Iraq, a very oil-rich region. But my conversation with Winky Medad about the Palestinian UN bid and the potential violence in Judea and Samaria, and also the statement by the PLO ambassador to the United Nations that any Palestinian state will be Jew-free, is very key. You need to listen to that conversation as well. Go to our website, prophecytoday.com, and there you'll be able to go to PTRN, Prophecy Today Radio Network, which will have every one of these interviews that I've been talking about there for you to listen to from our broadcast Prophecy Today weekend. My conversation with Winky Medad, I have to tell you, is evidence that the soon coming of the fulfillment of Bible prophecy seemingly is better into focus than it has ever been. Take a look with me, if you will, at the book of Ezekiel chapter 35. Ezekiel chapter 35 is a part of the book of Ezekiel, the last 16 chapters, that is dealing with the restoration of the kingdom people, which would be the Jewish people, and the kingdom practices, because 202 verses in chapters 40 to 46 detail the temple that Messiah will build, that Jesus Christ, when he comes back to the earth, and that's found in Zechariah chapter 6, verse 12, that he builds the temple. It's described, all the details there in Ezekiel chapters 40 to 46. Well, that's this 16 chapters, the last 16 chapters of the book of Ezekiel. But right in the middle of all that, there is a judgment pronounced against Mount Seir. You read the first 4 verses of chapter 35, and you continually see judgment against Mount Seir. Mount Seir, Mount Seir. What is this all talking about, and who are the people of Mount Seir? In order to know that, you have to go back to the book of Genesis chapter 36, where God sends Esau into Mount Seir. Remember chapter 37, verse 1, God allows Jacob and his family to stay in the promised land, and he sends his twin brother Esau to Mount Seir. Mount Seir is the location where Petra is, and that was the headquarters for Edom, when Esau and his family got there, they changed the name of that location, that region, from Mount Seir to Edom. That's the lower third of modern-day Jordan today. That's the area where we're talking about, where the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, went to live. By the way, you can trace the Edomites through the Bible. They're in chapter 36 of the book of Genesis, in verse 12. It says that his grandson was named Amalek, who would become the father of the Amalekites. In the book of Exodus, chapter 17, there's a fight between the Amalekites and the Israelites at Rephidim. 1 Samuel chapter 15, the Lord remembers that, and he tells the prophet Samuel to tell Saul, the first king of Israel, to kill all of the Amalekites. And by the way, notice that Agag was the king of the Amalekites, ended up that he died at the sword, his own sword, at the hand of Samuel, who chopped him up in little pieces there in Gilgal. But what's so significant about that, when you look at Esther chapter 3 and verse 1, you find out that Haman, the villain of the book of Esther, was an Agagite. He was from the Edomites, and he had a great-great-grandson. His name was Herod the Great. The Edomites in biblical times are the Palestinian people today. Now quickly look back to the book of Ezekiel chapter 35 with me. Judgment on the Palestinians. That's what it's talking about when it says judgment on Mount Seir. Verse 5 says that because you kill the Jews, because you kill your brothers, you're going to be judged. Verse 10 says, because you take the Jewish land, it's blasphemy. The Lord says to the Edomites, it's blasphemy against me. And that's why you're going to be judged. There's additional prophetic passages that deal with this. Malachi says that the Palestinians will return to rebuild. The Lord says he'll call their borders the borders of wickedness. He says he'll have indignation against them forever. And the little book of Obadiah says how it's all going to end. They will be, the Palestinians, the Edomites of biblical times, will be as if they have never been. Now that happens when Jesus Christ comes back, and the Lord gives all of the possessions he's promised to the Jewish people. My friend, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will continue until the return of Jesus Christ. As you look at God's prophetic word, that's the only conclusion that you can come to. What we are seeing unfold in our world today is the setting of that stage for all of these prophecies to be fulfilled. You know, the world today has as its major focus what's happening as it relates to the Palestinians. Indeed, they're going to go to the United Nations. Supposedly, they're going to make a unilateral declaration of a Palestinian state. If that's rejected, or even if it's approved, the Palestinians are going to go to the street one way or the other. If it's rejected, they go to the streets. And, of course, if it's approved, the Israelis will reject it on the ground in Israel, and that'll cause the Palestinians to go to the streets. This conflict is going to continue on. It's not going to be resolved until Jesus Christ comes back. But this is the only time in history that this has been as intense as it is today. Let me just remind you of this one thing. Resolution of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict will only take place after the rapture of the church. And by the way, having said that, there's really nothing left for me to say except let's keep looking up until...